Okay, remember we asked the question, does man's law supersede God's law? Well, we have a special veteran here who served our country that did 3 postings, and I think it's really important. Um, Hopefully, I have his permission to post what he had written publicly for everybody else to see in case they missed it at the time when he posted them. That proves no, man does not have the authority to supersede God's law. Man does not have a right to say the Lord rose from the dead on Sunday when it was actually Monday. Man does not have a right to force Christians to remove Jesus' fish emblems off buildings. Man does not have a right to remove the Ten Commandments from courthouses and public parks. Man does not have a right to plot against citizens for an evil New World Order. But here is the man to explain it, a veteran who served our country. A short prepper civics lesson, dated July 4th, 2012, by Chris Ray. The Declaration of Independence. This article is about the Founding Fathers, Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and the Declaration of Independence. I mentioned in my Memorial Day prayer that I had some concerns about our country, but that was not the time to discuss them. This week, celebrating the birth of our nation, seems fitting, though I could be wrong. I will post a series of 3 articles on my concerns about America and what might lie in our future. These articles will not be the usual article on preparedness, but I hope you still read them as they point out reasons to prepare. I'll touch on 2 things I generally stay away from: politics and prophecy. There might even be a little civics lesson, but I promise not to bore you. Some time ago, I started studying some of the founding fathers and the creation of our nation. What I found was that many of our founding fathers were men of God who wanted separation from a king, that is, government, that was overreaching into almost every aspect of our lives, of their lives. Our nation was, in fact, based on Judeo Christian values, though many today would say that is untrue. When you look at what the vision of the Founding Fathers was, and when you read the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, you begin to see how far we are from the democratic republic they set out to build. Please don't misunderstand. I think our form of government is still the best in the world, but I do see where we have gone astray. Also, to clear, over the next 3 days, you might get the feeling that I am anti government. This is not true. I am just very pro citizen and for small government. The Founding Fathers. The founders knew that government was not the answer. The governed were. We are to be a government of the people, by the people, for the people. The way that our electoral system is supposed to run, someone would leave their normal job to run for office, win the majority of votes, or electoral college votes, and then stay in office for a term or 2. I believe it was their intent that the elected would leave office and return to their normal job after the service, not stay in office their entire lives. They did not want the federal government to be the immense size it is today. They wanted the state to regulate its people, and when the state overreached, the federal government would step in. They went to great lengths to make sure the president could not be set up to be another king. He was granted only so much power, with 2 other branches of government to keep him in check. There was much conversation and debate to craft a document that would limit the scope of government while defining the rights of the people. The Constitution. The Constitution defines the rights and roles of the three branches of government, giving powers and setting limitations. Many other countries have modeled their constitution after the United States of America's. Is it perfect? Of course not. It was written by men. If it were perfect, it wouldn't have counted a slave as one-fifth of a man. Yes, I know that counting as one-fifth was a step in the right direction, and no, I'm not condoning slavery. The Constitution defines how a bill should become law, gives the power to collect taxes, coin money, keep an army and navy, and even defines how to make an amendment to correct, add, or remove something in the future, such as the 13th Amendment that abolished slavery. The Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights puts limits on government and empowers and protects citizens. It gives us the right to free speech and to bear arms, and it gives us protection from unlawful search and seizures, the right to plead the fifth, and to not incriminate oneself. This is also where amendments are made, such as ending slavery, as well as starting and stopping prohibition. The Declaration of Independence. This document, in my opinion, took great courage to write. Aside from the Bible, it is one of the most important documents in existence, largely due to the following sentence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The reason that one sentence is so important is because it states the rights mentioned above in the Bill of Rights, and the right of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness are granted by God, and what God grants, man cannot take away. This article is from a series of 3, which are, as we just covered, a short proper civics lesson. The next one will be The Future of America, and the last one, God's Law versus Man's Law, which is fitting for Holy Monday, the Resurrection Revelation. Does man's law supersede God's law? The Future of America, dated July 5th, 2012, by Chris Ray. In this article, I want to go over just some of my concerns for America and what it might mean for our future. I'll briefly touch on prophecy and what role it will have on America's future, but I will also use our recent history as well as the recent history of some other countries to see where we may be heading. Concerns for our nation. No country is perfect, nor is any administration. That being said, the last 4 years have seen a real infringement on the Constitution, damage to the economy, and so many other concerns too numerous to name. The following is a short list. Passing laws that are 1,000 of pages long without reading a single one. Nancy Pelosi actually said the following about the health care bill in 2010. But we have to pass the bill so that you can find out what is in it. away from the fog of controversy. The DHS allows the TSA to molest people at will. I've heard of a grandmother in a wheelchair with a colostomy bag, a child in a wheelchair, and multiple others that are disgraceful. The authorization of using drones on Americans, to me, is stomping on the Fourth Amendment, which protects us against the unreasonable searches and seizures. If you have probable cause, get a warrant. But, to my understanding, that is not a requirement the FAA put on the multiple police agencies that now have permission to use them. God has been chased from our schools, courthouses, some national parks, and if some had it in their way, from every other aspect of our lives. Our economy is being propped up, and I fear the final nails are being added to it. The fault for this lies with both parties. One used a hammer and nails, the other a pneumatic nail gun. Heroes coming home from serving their country are labeled as potential terrorists by the DHS. They retracted it, but it was said nonetheless. We have a president that forgets to say God in a few different addresses and has said we are no longer a Christian nation. They granted power to shut down the internet in times of crisis. This would effectively shred the First Amendment and shut down free speech. There have been multiple rumors at potential gun grabs. This is one of the reasons gun sales skyrocketed after our president was elected and why ammo was so hard to find. Are they true or not? I don't know, but it would not be an easy task. The Constitution was designed with checks and balances to keep any one side from becoming too powerful. Our current president has stated numerous times that he'll do it with or without Congress or the Senate. The federal government has grown vastly under both political parties to such a behemoth that in some months the unemployment rate dropped because of employees hired by the government, as was the case with the census. The President and Congress have ignored the Constitution and the Bill of Rights on several occasions, creating czars that are outside the three branches of government and using obscure rules to pass laws that could not pass by a majority vote, such as Obamacare. As I said, I could go on and on. The future of America, prophetic. I'm not a prophet, but I have studied it for years. I'm not saying whether we are in the end times or not, but Christians in America are aware that America is not mentioned in the end times. While true, many nations are not mentioned in the end times. This doesn't mean that they don't exist or are destroyed. It just means that they are not key players. I am a patriot. I have served my country and love it dearly. I do believe that America will decline from the world's one superpower to a nation of less prominence. This is not something I look forward to. It is a bitter pill to swallow. Christ wasn't looking forward to the cross, yet he said, not his will, but God's be done. I'm not saying we just lie down and let our values continue to be trampled, but that we be ready and expect things to change. Right now, we are the world's police force, and the chief reason some nations don't outright attack Israel, but instead launch rockets from surrogate organized thugs who are backed by Iran and other nations. We're told in the Bible that the entire world will turn against Israel. I believe that for God's will to be done, America must be removed from being the sole superpower and Israel's protector. That does not mean we Christians turn our hearts from her or stop praying for Israel. America has been a key player, not the only superpower since World War II, if not earlier. Whether the end times are upon us or many years from now, America has changed and will continue to change. I cover some of what I think will happen in our future below. Some of it will be mild and some could be extreme. but this is part of why we prepare. I have read that some people claim America will be destroyed. Others claim that America is actually the new Babylon. And others state that America will be broken up into smaller sections. Like I said, I'm not a prophet. I don't know what the Lord has planned for America, but His will be done, whether I like it or not. The future of America, secular. Even if the end times are hundreds of years from now, America will change. The following are some of the things I think we may see. As I mentioned above, I'm not a prophet. I am getting these ideas from looking at the current and recent past of world and national events. While we could be attacked by an EMP or an all-out assault from another nation, or a variety of other things that originate from outside our borders, I believe more likely we'll do it to ourselves. The colossal amount of debt we have, we will eventually come to the point where we are forced to make cuts. The military is a popular place for making cuts, especially on the left. If cuts are made deep enough, we will pull out of the many countries we maintain bases in. The argument could be made that this should be done now. Once we have less of a presence around the world, cuts could be made to the size of the military. We would then have little to no presence in foreign countries and a much smaller force at home. The once most powerful military the world has ever seen is now rendered more or less irrelevant. Before Argentina's economy collapsed, it was on par with America's. Once it did crash, inflation climbed almost as fast as the crime rate. It's been a decade, and they are not even close to where they once were. Japan's economy collapsed, and they call it Japan's lost decade. They were still working their way back before being ravaged by earthquakes, tsunamis, and nuclear reactor problems. Cuts will also have to be made on public services that many people have come to expect as rights. When this was done in Spain, the people rioted. When it was done in Greece, people rioted. There were also anti-austerity riots in London in 2011. The point I am making is that when we reach that point where we must make cuts, I think we may see riots worse than we have seen around the world, rioting so bad that people will beg for the government to step in and stop the riots and looting. Martial law and the suspension of habeas corpus. In a large-scale riot, many police departments could soon be pushed to their limit. Local or federal governments could invoke martial law and suspend habeas corpus. Before going any further, let me define a few terms. First is martial law. Wikipedia actually has a very good definition of what martial law is, so I'll just copy it here. Martial law is the imposition of military rule by military authorities over designated regions on an emergency basis, usually only temporary, when the civilian government or civilian authorities failed to function effectively. Example given: maintain order and security and provide essential services. When there are extensive riots and protests, or when the disobedience of the law becomes widespread. In most cases, military forces are deployed to subdue the crowds, to secure government buildings and key or sensitive locations, and to maintain order. Generally, military personnel replace civil authorities and perform some or all of their functions. In full-scale martial law, the highest-ranking military officer would take over or be installed as the military governor or as head of the government, thus removing all powers from the previous executive, legislative, and judicial branches of government. Here is the definition of habeas corpus offered by Cornell University Law School. Latin for that you have the body. A writ of habeas corpus is used to bring a prisoner or other detainee, example given, institutionalized mental patient, before the court to determine if the person's imprisonment or detention is lawful. In the U.S. system, federal courts can use the writ of habeas corpus to determine if a state's detention of a prisoner is valid. A habeas petition proceeds as a civil action against the state agent, usually a warden, who holds the defendant in custody. It can also be used to examine any extradition processes used, amount of bail, and the jurisdiction of the court. The reason these two terms are important is that they could be used to quell any out-of-control rioting or violence. Suspension of habeas corpus means you can be detained without going before a court to see if it is merited. This could be indefinitely in a time of crisis. If martial law is declared, the Constitution has effectively been replaced with military rule, thus suspending your God-given rights. Martial law has been declared a few times in American history. Andrew Jackson imposed it in the War of 1812. In 1892, it was imposed to quell a rebellion from striking miners who blew up a mine. It was used again in 1914 to stop another miner uprising. In 1934, the governor of San Francisco used martial law to stop rioting during a dock worker strike. Hawaii was placed under martial law in 1941 after the attack from the Japanese on Pearl Harbor. There is some other confusion if martial law was declared after Hurricane Katrina. I've seen reports saying that it was not declared. However, this statement says that the mayor of New Orleans did in fact declare it. There have been people claiming that the government has been just waiting for an opportunity to implement martial law and throw people into FEMA camps. I never really bought into that line of thought. Look back at the freedom the founders wanted for us and how much the last two administrations have grown the federal government, as well as how much the current president has sidestepped the Constitution to get more and more power. I'm convinced that this president, more than any before, would be willing to suspend habeas corpus and instill martial law on a semi-broad scale. I say semi-broad because it would be nearly impossible to enforce martial law in a large area unless all of our troops are pulled home as a result of cuts and closing foreign bases I mentioned earlier. If martial law isn't declared, there will be financial cuts made and liberties will continue to erode. That is, unless and until a majority of Americans wake up and demand that we move back to what the founders had intended for us. Smaller government, people empowered to pursue life, liberty, and happiness on their own, not expecting Uncle Sam to hand it out to them. This article is from a series of 3, which we had previously covered a short prepper civics lesson. This was The Future of America, and our next one, the third and final, God's Law versus Man's Law. Okay, to answer the question, does man's law supersede that of God's law? This article is dated July 6, 2012 by Chris Ray, God's Law versus Man's Law. Over the last 2 days in a short prepper civics lesson, and in The Future of America, I have detailed that the founders stated what our God-given rights are. I have also given some possible scenarios where those rights may be restricted, if not completely taken away. How then should a Christian respond? Romans chapter 13, verse 1. A few years back, I decided to read one chapter of the Bible every morning. There were some things I didn't understand. I spent some time researching them. One of them was Romans chapter 13, verse 1. This verse differs greatly depending on the version of the Bible you have. I'll post two. King James Version for Romans 13:1. Let every soul be subject unto the higher powers, for there is no power but of God. The powers that be are ordained of God. Many other versions are similar to this New International Version. Everyone must submit himself to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except that which God has established. The authorities that exist have been established by God. The reason this was difficult for me is that there have been some truly awful governing authorities throughout history. I question whether a loving God would want us to subject ourselves to their authority. Like I said, this didn't make sense. On a side note, there have been bad governments that have used this verse to keep Christians in line, claiming your God tells you to submit. I did a bit of digging and thinking and found an article called Spiritual Authority and Romans 13. I don't agree with everything the author says, but he does make it clear that Paul was not telling us to be subject to the world's authority, that we were to be subjected to our spiritual authorities. That made this verse more clear for me, as some of man's laws absolutely contradict God's law. But let's say that the verse actually means that we should submit to government. Does that mean even when it goes against God's law? God's law versus man's law. As a general rule, Christians make excellent citizens. By living as Christ did and loving our neighbors as ourselves, we tend to stay out of trouble. There are many times when man's laws and God's laws are the same. For example, many of our current laws are based off of the Ten Commandments. Until recently, they were displayed in many courtrooms across the country. In some places, they still are. There are times when there is a law that man uses to infringe upon our Christian liberties, such as taking a cross down from a national park or city, stopping a church from ringing a bell. At times like these, I am reminded of Matthew chapter 5, verse 41. If someone forces you to go on 1 mile, go with him 2 miles. When a Roman soldier would ask a Jew for directions, Jews would often give them the wrong ones. To stop this, a law was created that said when a Roman soldier asked for directions, the Jew had to walk with him for the first mile. Guess I couldn't get away with that one. When our Christian liberties are infringed upon, I think we should still make a stand. Do battle in courts, protest, or by other means voice opposition. But in the end, I think, since it does not go against God's law, we must accept it and walk the second mile. But then there are times when man's law absolutely goes against God's law. What should we do then? Following are a few examples of when God's people rebelled against man's law and followed God's. Daniel chapter 1, verse 8. King Nebuchadnezzar has requested among others that Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah be put in his service. They are given wine and fancy foods to eat. Daniel and company refused to defile themselves with the royal foods and asked to be allowed to eat just fruit and vegetables for 10 days. Daniel chapter 3 verse 1. This is the story of King Nebuchadnezzar building a 90-foot tall statue of gold and demanding that everyone bow and worship it. When Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego refused, they were thrown into the furnace. Daniel chapter 6 verse 7. There is a law passed that anyone who prays to any god or man for the next 30 days would be thrown into the lion's den. Daniel prays to God and is thrown into the den. Esther chapter 4 verse 11 through chapter 7 verse 3. It is forbidden to enter the king's chambers without invitation. Violation of this is punishable by death. Esther enters and is welcomed by the king. She later asks for her people to be spared, and the king grants her request. Matthew chapter 2 verse 16. King Herod orders the murder of all male children, aged 2 and younger. Joseph and Mary flee to Egypt. John chapter 9 verse 19. Jesus tells Pontius Pilate he has no authority over him, essentially saying God is permitting Christ's death. The Book of Acts. There are many examples of the Sanhedrin telling the 12 apostles to stop preaching about Christ. There are just some examples I was able to find. Thank you to Mike for the assistance. God's law should trump man's law every time. There is almost always a cost, loss of reputation, financial penalty, and, for some, even to this day, martyrdom. When man's law contradicts God's law, how you respond is between you and God. I am just here to point out that there is biblical precedence for going against man's law and government to keep the laws of God. This article is from a series of 3. They are a short prepper civics lesson, the future of America, God's law versus man's law. So, now we have the answers to the main question. Does man's law supersede that of God's law? And you're probably wondering, where is the relevancy to what day Jesus rose from the dead? Well, I can tell you right now, it has a lot of relevancy. You first off will have to go to the website, which I will provide at the end of this Holy Monday presentation, called Infowars.com. And there you will learn about the garden plot cable splicer, which Oliver North was ahead of when he was on trial for whatever charges he had to face, and how certain questions were not allowed to be asked of Oliver North. But many, many years later, he reveals the truth because he's no longer in service. The fact that Adolf Hitler tried for a New World Order, although it wasn't called that at the time, and failed because he started too soon. It wasn't time yet. But New World Order means you denounce God, worship the devil because he wants to be worshipped, and you take an RFID chip, which is ran by a supercomputer called the Beast. And if anyone was able to successfully hack into the Beast, which is 1 city block long, there is one that's 2 city blocks long called Sister of the Beast. And it will be used to run all RFID chips around the world, the new monetary system. And like our Social Security number, for those of us who are U.S. citizens, it will always end with 3 additional numbers, 666. Remember what the book of Revelation says, anyone who takes the mark of the beast shall be condemned. So, no to the New World Order. Next thing is that when I was a kid, in agreement to what Ray here said, I remember the last time we did Pledge of Allegiance in the public school, or even said a prayer. That is no longer allowed. Soon as Obama got into office, and the controversy whether he was American or not, which the uncle spilled the beans and he is not, it was forged birth certificates, and even Trump agreed it was fake. But I can understand why Trump would go along with it, because there's an old saying, to defeat the government, you got to think like the government. So I would have done exactly what Trump would have done. I would have gone with the flow and said, oh yes, he is an American. But we all know the truth of it, thanks to a Hawaiian county sheriff and his deputy. So, they removed 10 commandments. Oh, and we have to harass the polygamists, but allow gay marriage between men marrying men, women marrying women. And then let's harass the Christian even more and make them remove the Jesus fish emblem. We're not done yet. Take the 10 commandments out away from courthouses and public parks. If you don't stand up for your rights, as God has given us the right to do so, you'll lose a lot more. You will not have the freedom of religion to worship God. You'll either worship the devil, or your head will be chopped off by a guillotine. That means no freedom of speech. You cannot protest. You cannot publish what you want. And you will not be allowed to assemble yourselves together in protest like on a strike. You'll be considered terrorists, and there you go to a FEMA death camp to be exterminated like rats. Forget about the Miranda rights. They'll just handcuff you or shoot you on sight if you resist. There is no writ of habeas corpus at that time then, because you could be held in a FEMA death camp for 10 years before you even get to be arraigned to plead guilty or not guilty. That is what the New World Order is in store for you. The relevance is, if the government can make all these changes, what makes you think that man who works in the government can't also say, let's install a pagan holiday called Easter, and we'll just say 3 days is from Friday to Sunday, and Jesus rose on Easter Sunday, when the Bible tells the truth, he rose on Monday. That's something for you to think about. As I said before, not that I'm trying to make a political issue of it, we have had a most vile president, Hussein Obama, and he used illegal aliens from Mexico to make sure he would win the second term of presidency. But it's funny, government doesn't really want to talk about that. Oh no, because then the truth would come out that the government's corrupt. But yet they want to slander our president, who wants to make America great again. The Russians had nothing to do with it. And anybody who tries to believe what someone says that he did, you're playing into FEMA's hands. FEMA loves sheeple, dumb as sheep. Get it? Because the dumber you are, the more you're going to comply to worship the devil, take the RFID chip, or off with your head. So I think we as Americans not only have to stand up for God, but we also have to stand up for our country. It's time to trump up our rights and make the right choice.
I am a soldier, a prayer warrior of the army of my God. The Lord Jesus Christ is my commanding officer. The Holy Bible is my code of conduct. Faith, prayer, and the Word are my weapons of warfare. I have been taught by the Holy Spirit, trained by experience, tried by adversity, and tested by fire. I am a volunteer in this army, and I am enlisted for eternity. I will either retire in this army at the rapture or die in this army, but I will not get out, sell out, be talked out. I am faithful, compatible, and dependable. If my God needs me, I am there. I am a soldier, a prayer warrior. I am not a baby. I do not need to be pampered, petted, primed up, pumped up, picked up, or pepped up. I am a soldier, a prayer warrior. No one has to call me, remind me, write me, visit me, entice me, or lure me. I am a soldier, a prayer warrior. I am not a wimp. I am in place, saluting my King, obeying his orders, praising his name, and building his kingdom. I am a soldier, a prayer warrior. No one has to send me flowers, gifts, food, cards, candy, or give me handouts. I do not need to be cuddled, cradled, cared for, or catered to. I am committed. I cannot have my feelings hurt bad enough to turn me around. I cannot be discouraged enough to turn me aside. I cannot lose enough to cause me to quit. When Jesus called me into this army, I had nothing. If I end with nothing, I will still come out even, and I will win. My God will supply my needs. I am more than a conqueror. I will always triumph. I can do all things through Christ. I am a soldier, a prayer warrior. Devils cannot defeat me. People cannot delusion me. Weather cannot weary me. Sickness cannot stop me. Battles cannot beat me. Money cannot buy me. Governments cannot silence me. And hell cannot handle me. I am a soldier, a prayer warrior. Even death cannot destroy me. But when my commander calls me from this battlefield, he will promote me to a captain, and then bring me back to rule this world with him. I am a soldier, a prayer warrior, in the army of God, and I'm marching, claiming victory. I will not give up. I will not turn around. I am a soldier, a prayer warrior, and God has my back.